Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and it's time for this week's Friday Morning GM with co-host Voss Laricos of Baltimore Beatdown. Voss, how you doing?
Very well, Ken. Very well. Had the opportunity to take my children to their first live game, and although the forecast didn't cooperate, the game script certainly did. Game we're going to remember for a long time.
All right. Yeah, you were telling me about that. You guys, where are your seats located?
We were in right below the press box, actually. I turned around behind me and saw Kyle Barber right there.
124. That's right.
Yep. Yeah, good seats. Right sideline for the return, right sideline for the Beckham touchdown. So, it was great.
Good stuff. Okay. Well, your kids appreciate it. Do they stay engaged? Do they have to be taken home early? Any of that going? You said you stayed to the end, right?
Absolutely. Stayed till the end. I offered to take them home early on the way downtown, but they said, no, we want to stay. And they were screaming their lungs off on third down all the way through.
Very good. That was a defining characteristic of this game that I'm really going to remember, is just how loud it was and how reverberative that stadium was. All right. We got lots of things to talk about on Friday Morning GM Day, but let's start with some housekeeping items. A little bit of movement at the margin of the roster, and the Ravens, I think, had been holding a roster spot open, I believe, since the Andrews injury, in order to move somebody onto the roster potentially. And Pepe was at the end of his 3-week window and was activated just now. And, it happens to coincide with the loss of Hamilton.
Yes, fortuitous timing there for sure. So Pepe's back into the fold. I'm not so sure he's an upgrade over Mollett. I think they're both sort of similar players, scrappy type of guys that might not have the athleticism to really mirror shifty receivers downfield. But adding another body to a position that now needs some help. And I don't know. I personally think maybe Marlon Humphrey in the interim might be the best slot option, and with Ronald Darby on the perimeter. But the more options, the better at this point.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that it was one extra, but they were down a defensive back. Pepe is a guy who has a little bit of experience at safety too, and somehow the Ravens needed to have one more defensive back. And I thought it was actually kind of strange, Rock Yassin sitting out of this last game, but. Yeah, this last game, he sat.
Yes.
Odd healthy scratch, but one where they, it might have been Tylan Wallace got the spot as the last special teams player.
And Jalen Armour Davis was active, and he actually made a pretty good block on the punt return. So it seems at that point if Darby is not earning playing time on defense after the way he's played this season, it's hard to see a reason to keep Yassin active. But now that equation changes potentially without Hamilton in the short term.
Yeah, definitely. You'd want Yassin as a backup on the outside, and in particular, you'd want him if you're planning to go back to Darby as a regular on the outside with Humphrey in the slot, that's going to end up being, the Ravens have played about 84% nickel this year, right around there. So it's 5/6 of the plays they're going to want to have Humphrey on the inside if they decided to go that route. I think there's a lot to be said for that. By the way, physical presence inside gives them the most similar player they can field to Hamilton in that position. It definitely takes something away from the outside, but Darby's played so well that it's hard to really be concerned about that at this exact point. If Darby were to go in again, it's funny. Darby actually he was the guy who bumped Kyle Fuller out of the slot position 2 years ago at Denver, which made Fuller available last year to the Ravens.
I didn't remember that. Yeah, it's the Denver slot man pipeline, I guess.
There you go. All right. So at the same time, Devin Duvernay obviously wasn't in for the punt return, the big one. He's on IR with a back injury. Don't know how serious that is, but a 4-week injury at this point in the season basically means your season is over. I don't think they would have for sure put him on IR if they were hoping to DTR him. They still have a couple of DTRs, but I don't think they would. I don't think they would necessarily make the move at this point when you're short on bodies who can help you anyway. Because you're at a point where the roster is largely degraded. The players on the margin of the roster can't help you in the same way they can early in the season. And early in the season, remember, they had everybody as walking wounded on the inactive list. all the starters. So now they would actually probably have room to do that kind of thing now, given, there's a few guys like Salah and whatnot they don't want to activate on game day that are just there for, a 2024 placeholder. But there's right now, this would be time they could tolerate some of that walking wounded nature if they thought the person would be back within 4 weeks.
Agreed. Apparently, Harbaugh intimated that he does expect Duvernay back for the postseason. I'm not sure what you're really getting out of Duvernay at this point. Wallace took his very limited few 3, 4, 5 a game snaps on offense the last few weeks, and now he broke off the longest return of the season, obviously. So I expect Wallace to be the return man going forward. I'm not sure if it's worth reactivating Duvernay when the time comes, and I expect probably Malik Harrison, now that he is practicing in full this week off the groin injury, to get that last game day in activation.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And we saw even on that first drive where the Ravens normally would have played a lot of base defense and had Harrison on opposite Robinson. Instead, they had Van Noy on for a fair amount. Some of it was Clowney opposite Robinson. I think they'll want to go back to that because they really want to restrict snaps for their big 3 pass rushers and keep them as fresh as possible. This last week wasn't a great game for pass rushing anyway, just because of the conditions. But sure. I thought that if you had Harrison in there, he could have really helped you in run defense on early downs.
Agreed. I think they did miss his presence. Van Noy, I pretty much took most of his snaps from what I could tell just comparing to the previous few weeks. But you want to keep Van Noy and Clowney fresh. I think they're doing a fantastic job of rotating bodies to keep everyone fresh at pretty much every single position group, with the exception of the defensive line.
Yeah, they don't have backups at inside linebacker. Those guys play every snap, but those are positions where it's fairly common across the league to have a committed nickel team, plus a couple 100% guys there. And that's why your green dots only come from 4 positions. They come from either of the 2 safety positions, or they come from either to the inside linebacker positions. But you almost never have it from another slot. But on the defensive line, they've one of the problems with this year has been they haven't had anybody to kick inside. So if you have an extra OLB to kick inside, then you can reduce those defensive line snaps a little bit. And now they're still averaging about 43. The package that they played this last week a lot was the open nickel, the uncovered end where they had Urban as an outside linebacker on one side. Outside linebacker, that's wrong. He's a 5-tech on one side and the outside linebacker on the other, but only one outside linebacker. And that's one of the ways you can put 3 defensive linemen on the field and make a sacrifice. You can do it in base package. You can do it with that uncovered look where you still maintain 2 inside linebackers and 5 defensive backs. And you can do it with the jumbo nickel, which is something the Ravens have used in the past, but they haven't used this year, where you take one of your inside linebackers off in order to put a 3rd defensive lineman on. So I thought Urban, by the way, played really well this last week. He was the guy. He was a big help to the run defense.
Agreed. And that's this is the type of team where his skill set comes in handy the most when you have to go to base, and there are going to be facing some teams that also branch off of this Shanahan tree in the coming weeks.
All right, well, great. Well, the other guy who's been sitting for a while now is Malik Ham, and I don't remember if he has 2 weeks left or 1 week left now. It may only be it might be 2 more weeks. It is only 1?
He was 1 week behind Pepe, if I recall.
Okay, he's 1 week behind Pepe, and he's only got 1 more, obviously. Yeah, so it'd be by next Tuesday they have to make a decision on him. We talked a little bit about his presence on the IR DTR list as being kind of a prophylactic thing, as it was with Pepe, and it really paid off to have the prophylactic in this case. It might or might not with Malik Ham, but if the Ravens were to have an injury there, and obviously the big one would be if Harrison was to get hurt again somehow, then I think Ham could provide some of that run defense and I think some coverage skills that the Ravens really haven't had from that position all season. They've done it a little bit with Kyle Van Noy, but much less than in previous years. So I think if Ham comes back, we'll see more of a traditional Sam linebacker in the Ravens sense that you get some pass rush flexibility out of it.
And the other big note that kind of dovetails into the comment about Ham is the addition of Malik Cunningham, Patriots, former Louisville quarterback, was with the Patriots, is now on the Ravens active roster. So they now have 4 quarterbacks on the 53. I personally think that's too many. I think you can make a case 3 is too many. And I would like to see one of those quarterbacks, probably Johnson or Huntley, jettisoned in favor of either a defensive lineman or maybe activation of Malik Cam, which does allow you to go to that jumbo potentially to alleviate some of those snaps from the D-line. One way or the other, I think one more body in the front five is probably in their best interest.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would love to have 6 defensive linemen on this team because I just think it makes a lot of sense in terms of keeping your bodies keeping healthy at this point. It also is one of the few places where at this point in the year, you can still occasionally find a player who's pretty useful. And maybe Ndamukong Suh is not the guy. He's obviously expressed a desire to come back. But the Ravens, if you look back to 2019, brought in Pecco and Jelly Ellis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're able to get meaningful defensive snaps played at a I would say above the replacement level in both cases, and it really helped the team. And I think that you could do that this year, and another big body would make a lot of sense. It would also really help you if anything were to happen to Michael Pierce, you'd be much more prepared to go. And I think Travis Jones could take more snaps. He's one of the only guys on the line who could do more than he's doing right now. But you'd still want to have another big body in there to be sure you were prepared.
Yeah, what's Brandon Williams up to? Because he latched on with KC late last year, and I think he actually notched a sack, one of the few of his career when he was with the Chiefs last year. So there's some guys out there. What was that other big wide body that played for the Vikings for a long time? I think joined the Eagles late last year as well, but his name's escaping me at the moment.
I would have to think about that. I do not know. And it's not Michael Pierce, though.
No. And it wasn't Snacks Harrison either. Regardless, that is a place where, you can find a guy late, maybe on defensive line more than anywhere except for maybe running back, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Malik Cunningham because he took over at Louisville effectively right after Lamar left there. Lamar's last year was 2017. He started in 2018 at Louisville. They didn't play all the snaps there that year. And then was pretty much a regular for 3 straight years. And then in 22 as well, although he was hurt again for a portion of that. Definitely had an ascending look through 3 years in terms of what he was doing. Obviously does some things that are fairly similar to Lamar, which I think is what has people so excited. In fact, aside from the fact that they got a 25-year-old quarterback again.
Right. Toolsy player, showcased some playmaking ability in the preseason, especially. There was even rumors that he was competing for the starting gig in New England, and, arm strength, elusive with the ball in his hands, running on the ground. And if the Ravens keep him on the roster for the rest of the year, he will be an exclusive rights free agent to them, which I believe is about a $500,000 cap hit next year, Ken.
It should be a little bit more than that, right? Because it should be, but 700 I think is the league minimum, so maybe it's 800 or something, but it's not much.
Right. So that's really what I think this move is to save some money. Tyler Huntley is a little bit more tenured at this point. Josh Johnson. So if you can replicate what Huntley can do, which Cunningham has the tools to do for cheaper, then that helps you manage the rest of this roster, which is going to be tough to manage next spring.
So Tyler Huntley making a base salary of $2.6 million this year. It is possible that he'd be a guy that would go make some money, and we're going to talk about the number of exiting free agents the Ravens have. So you're saving $2 million is not insignificant. But beyond that, I think that they're looking for team control, first of all, which is about saving money, but it's also about, trying to play to a higher ceiling for Malik Cunningham, which I think that has to be part of the equation here. They've got to be looking for a better backup quarterback for Lamar in the long run.
I agree. Huntley's game manager, but if you have somebody with a little bit higher ceiling that can, put the team on his back, make some plays when you need it, pick up a third down. Not that Huntley never did that, but I think his contributions last year might have been a little bit overrated, making the Pro Bowl and those sort of things. So
really?
Cunningham,
making the Pro Bowl was overrated.
Cunningham, I think, I as soon as I saw this, I got excited, and I think DeCosta is one of the very best in the league at making these moves, finding these gems, getting players under team control. John Simpson, Trayvon Mullen, they're just. He just never stops working, turning over every stone. And Ozzie did the same, and that's one of the hallmarks of the Ravens, I think.
Yeah, it's got to be. You have to be good at that when you're consistently great at drafting, because you're going to be consistently turning over the roster. It's going to happen to the Ravens again this year. I don't know how you can beat on DaCosta for being a bad draft pick, but I've seen various people on Twitter, pick out, oh, look at the 4th and 5th and 6th round picks he's had. He sucks. He's just, and it's just, you have to be such a micro-focused person, even the second-round picks. Now, the Ravens have had some problems with second-round picks over the year. They also used 2 of their second-round picks to pick Lamar Jackson in 2018. So don't leave those out of the equation if we're going to talk the value of second-round picks, for example.
Torrey Smith, Ray Rice. Yeah, there's been a few hits in the second round as well. It's again, as you said, I think the 2018 draft class might be spoiled from people thinking that day 3 picks hit at a larger hit rate than they do. That draft class comes around once every 20 years. So day 3 picks, if you hit half of them, that's an A plus job.
Yeah, I've often thought that the reason that people refer to those things as lottery tickets is unfortunate, and EDC should not be the one who uses that terminology. They're not lottery tickets. They're like poker entries in the World Series of Poker. I can buy a ticket, and Phil Ivey can pay in for $10,000 to play in the World Series of Poker. Phil Ivey is the horse to bet on. Okay, we do not have equivalent lottery tickets to win the World Series of Poker, and that's really what this is that you're trying to say that the Ravens are no better drafting than any other team, or than the average team at least in those rounds, and that's complete horseshit. One other argument I've heard is that how would you know? Because it hasn't been the same guys making the draft picks. And I say it has been the same guys making the draft picks. Literally, since the very first day of Ravens history, it's been Newsome sitting next to DaCosta, or in the same room with DaCosta, having the biggest influence on that. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, the whole entire time. That's very true. Anyway. Yeah. Shall we transition into this expected snaps lost graphic put up by Nick Corte of Over the Cat?
Absolutely. Talk through it.
So expected snaps lost, or projected snaps lost, essentially is how many players that are impending unrestricted free agents on their team. And the Ravens have the second most this season at 43%. We've been talking about that since the beginning of this series, that it is a roster with a lot of one-year deals and expiring rookie contracts. Maybe the most concerning thing, and I don't think this is a doomsday prognostication by any means. There's options, there's ways to work around it. There's multiple avenues. The one thing I'm not concerned about running back or linebacker really at all. But some of the spots are clustered when you're looking at both of your offensive guards. You're looking at your top 2 defensive linemen. You're looking at 2 of your top 3 outside backers and 2 of your top 4 receivers. So they are kind of clustered in some positions, and it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that's the way to look at that most usefully, because they're going to have to let a lot of players go, and probably Geno Stone is going to have to go, but that's not the end of the world, because they do have other safeties in-house. They have other safeties that they'll probably pick up, and they've always been fantastic at finding cheap safety talent. I will say this for the safeties, they're going to use a lot of safeties next year if Queen is gone, which ends up being a kind of a clustering right in itself. But if you get rid of Queen, then all of a sudden your weak side linebacker has to include a dime back again. So they have to be prepared for that. And if you really are moving Hamilton to the slot permanently, which I hope they do, then they need another safety for that too. So there will be some need. Yeah. What do you want to talk about specifically in terms of position groupings first? Well,
I mean, that was pretty much it, but just how that sets up the landscape, the backdrop. The 12th least cap space in the league at $13 million projected. And I don't know if you caught this, Ken, but this was last week. Jason Fitzgerald from Over the Cap lowered his 2024 cap projection by $13 million from 255 to 243 or 242, and that's based off of rumblings he heard at the owners' meetings. That makes a big difference. So when you combine 43% of snaps lost with the 12th least cap space, that's where you got to find some kind of solutions here, and it's going to be multi-pronged.
Yeah, I'm afraid of what that means in terms of void years, that they're probably gonna again dip their toes into that. And honestly, paying off your void years is like paying off a mortgage anyway. You'd have to do it, over the course of 4 years or something.
Aaron Rodgers' season is officially over, but yours has just begun at MyBookie. NFL, college ball, and a brand new cash out system gives you options to bet and win all season long. First two legs of your parlay hit, cash out early and place another bet, or let it ride for a chance at an even bigger payday. Join us at MyBookie for an entire season filled with daily odd boost, same-game parlays, and huge prize pool contests. Right now, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code RAVENS on your first deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 in cash instantly credited to your MyBookie account. That's promo code RAVENS to claim your cash bonus now. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie. If you found a $100 bill on the ground, you wouldn't walk past it, so don't pass up on a chance at easy cash with MyBookie. MyBookie has the biggest online selection of odds and contests to fill all your sports betting needs anytime, anywhere, so you can turn that sports knowledge into cash in your wallet. Bet the NFL, college bowl games, or play for a share of big cash prizes in weekly blackjack tournaments. And if you've been waiting for the right time to get in on the action, that time is now. Make your winning move today. Sign up at MyBookie and use the promo code RAVENS to claim your deposit match, redeemable up to $1,000. Again, that's promo code RAVENS to claim your bonus. Experience the thrill of sports betting right from the comfort of your home. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie.
Get yourself out of that mess. But they're probably gonna have to go in deeper next year because they're in such the 13 million of reduction, if it holds up, and it might not, but if it holds up, it affects the teams on the margin a lot more than it affects the teams who have 60, 70 million. If you have 60 or 70 million, you hear a 13 million reduction, your first reaction ought to be a double fist pump, because if wealth is relative and you just gained a ton. So the teams that already have a bunch of cornerstone contracts get screwed out of it. But if you're looking for two reasons why Patrick Queen is not going to get really paid at the highest level, I think that might be one. And the other might be that teams come to their senses about the inside linebacker position potentially because of it. And it's not completely unrelated, and say that we're not going to pay an inside linebacker when we have $13 million less to pay in total.
Agreed. And apparently that, we were hearing rumors of this TV money was going to be a landfall, but I guess it's just not bumping up as fast as they thought. Maybe they're still paying off some of the COVID, borrowing. For comparison, Kansas City has expected to lose or potentially could lose 32% of their snaps. So that's a significant number as well. I would think they were 9th or 10th, but they have almost 3 times as much cap space as the Ravens. So that gives them a lot more maneuverability.
How many under contract do they have currently, though?
I didn't see that. I just kind of figured snaps loss is kind of a fill-in for that. Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, you're right. That's probably a pretty good way to look at it. This was one of the factors that Fitzgerald looked at when he came on the show earlier in the year, and he's saying, well, the Ravens have the 27th worst cap position or 27th best, so 5 from the bottom in terms of cap position. And one of the things he was looking at was the percentage of the roster that was going to turn over. But I would say, if anything, it got worse with the news of a reduction in cap. So. You definitely, the more you're underwater in terms of the cap, you want those cap dollars to be inflated and have them have less value than the ones you've already committed to.
Agreed. Yeah. And it's going to be a combination of factors. You're going to replace some of those snaps with rookies. Hypothetically, you're going to retain some of the players. You're going to bring in some new players, and you're going to rely on some in-house development as well. But I think they are pretty clearly, by all these different metrics behind the 8 ball. I think there's probably 3 options of how to proceed, 3 different strategic options. But I can lay those out unless you want to do a dovetail on that. I think the one way the Ravens have kind of done it is, quote unquote, a competitive rebuild. I think you can kind of look at the 2013 season that way. where you're playing with a short deck. You're playing with a short deck, but you're going to try to, just get in the dance. Maybe you're not a top 5 roster, but you're a top 10 roster, and see if you can catch lightning in a bottle. That's right. Option one. That's pretty much what they did for the last decade. Maybe not exactly, but as a general macro theory. The second one would be to keep pushing, keep borrowing, keep void year, keep backloading deals, restructuring contracts, and see if you can keep Zeitler in particular. I think kind of is maybe the tipping point here. If you're going to try to push pretty hard for 2024, you probably keep Zeitler. And then the other one is to kind of reset the cap and do a cap reset, even though you don't want to during your franchise quarterback's contract. Yeah. It might be in the team's best interest, and you kind of take a look. You take an eye towards, say, this next year we're not gonna sign a bunch of aging outside veterans. We're gonna trade away guys that are maybe on a 1-year deal that are in their mid early 30s. We're gonna look towards 2025 and then really build up a war chest for that.
Okay, well, let's talk about that and what it might look like. I mean, the obvious players that they'd be talking about unloading in a process like that, I think you'd have to start with Ronnie Stanley. I don't think I'm for it, just because of the barriers to re-enter and what it would do for Lamar and his unhappiness here. If they're don't have a solution at left tackle when they make themselves a big problem like that. Morgan Moses is so cheap, I don't think he would be the issue at all. You wouldn't re-sign Matabike, so you degrade your defensive line. And honestly, the other guy you might try and trade, and it wouldn't be for much because he hasn't been healthy the whole time, is Marlon Humphrey. And right. he's a good player, big cap number. But if you're going to reset the cap, you're talking about eating a bunch of dead money in 1 year. And I'd have to actually look and see just how costly that would be for the Ravens to do. But
for Humphrey, I think they redid him not too long ago.
A couple times.
So, yeah.
This year they've done it. Yeah, so if they in 24, it's basically a break-even thing. They lose about $1 million, so they could do it over a 2-year deal. But the idea is you would be resetting the cap really with the 25 and 26 numbers going to somebody else. So right. I am not in favor of that. Let me be clear about this. Of the choices, and unfortunately, this would involve a lot of borrowing. However you go, I want the nice level rebuild. As a season ticket holder, I don't want them to say your tickets are worth nothing next year. I do not want that. Sure. I don't want them to tell me to come and support the team at a bunch of cold December games for the tickets you paid for, even though we're not we're 2 games out of the wild card. I'd be frustrated by that.
It's tough, They haven't done it in 20 years. That may be the longest stretch that I'm aware of. I know Pittsburgh and New England and Green Bay are stability-minded teams as well, but 20 years with just spending up to the cap every single year for 20 years, that's a long way. That's a long time. And I think there is, and I don't have a strong feeling one way or another. I just don't want to be banging your head against the cinder block wall with the top 12 roster for 10 years or 5 years thinking that you're going to break through, because I do think a little bit of revisionist history from 2012, they weren't the best team, but as far as the talent on the team, they were top 5 going into that season.
Oh, I didn't think so. Going into the season,
odds and power rankings.
Okay,
power rankings and by odds.
So I probably agree with you, but the injuries very early in that year to Lardarius Webb, who was the best cornerback in the entire league, and Ray Lewis, of course, degraded their roster pretty quickly. I'd say for full season talent, that team was the worst of the first 5 Harbaugh teams that all made the playoffs, and they incredibly were the one that made it all way through and won the Super Bowl. It's just like the people who say who point to the run and play strategy or whatever you want to call it, the level performance strategy, will point to 2012 and say, look, that's all they need to do is continue to get lottery tickets, and eventually they'll get in, they'll win one. And the other people who say, I want to ride the roller coaster because everybody else is doing it, which is not really true, point to the LA Rams a couple of years, and they say, look, right, that pays off. You can trade every draft pick you have. Doesn't matter. You can win a Super Bowl with it.
Well, yeah. I agree with you, Ken. I think 2012, I do think it was a better walking into the season. So that's what we're talking about. Is are you? I mean, that team was pretty mortgaged to as well. That team had a lot of backloaded deals, and they were, let's sign Suggs and keep his cap hits low because we want to keep Lewis and Reed and Bolden and everybody around. And they knew they were going to have to pay Flacco. Anyway, point being, I think the idea that if you are too aggressive, that the bottom's going to completely fall out on you and you're going to have, 3 years in a row where you're finishing last place, I don't necessarily buy that. I think the Ravens showed in 2002 that they are capable of rebuilding quickly. They actually won more games from 2002 to 2005 after going all in 2001 than they did in 2013 to 2015 after trying to levelize the losses. And the other point I would make is both the Rams, who were more irresponsible with draft pick trades than any team I can remember, and the Saints, who are more irresponsible with mortgaging the salary cap than any team, they're both sitting at 6 and 7 right now. So they're not, the Panthers or the Bears.
But okay, and they happen to be sitting at 6 and 7 in the NFC, where 6 and 7 puts you right in the middle of the wild card hunt. But is that where you want to be as a season ticket holder? Do I want to know, like, going into a season? I mean, it's weak as hell NFC. So in some ways, actually, it's barbelled NFC. It's very weak. At the bottom end, they have the worst teams in the National Football League are over on that side of the ledger, and some of the best teams are as well, with San Francisco and Dallas and Philadelphia. But the teams in the middle all seem to be 6 and 7. So,
right.
Yeah,
I guess, and I know we have a slightly different opinion on this. Theoretically, I don't know if having the 10th best roster improves your odds of making that Super Bowl run much more than having the 15th best. So if you're borrowing here to get a little bit higher here, to take away a little bit from this other season here, I'm just not sure how dramatic that would be. But I think it will be very interesting to see, they did open up that void years can of worms. Are they going to chase it? Are they going to – I don't think they're going to reset, although I don't think that's a terrible idea personally. Or are they going to try to levelize? So I think it's going to be interesting because they are, as I said, they are behind the 8 ball. Something they need to make some strategic choices here.
Yeah, and the strategic choice could be just to continue with a level ship, but it is a strategic choice because they'll pay more to do it this next year than they have in the past because of the unexpected rejiggering of cap. Escalating the value of each cap dollar for next year. They're not inflating away cap dollars. So yeah, it's a thorny issue for the Ravens. I'm sure that when they heard that news or they were made privy to the information that the cap was likely to go down next year. If in truth that's the case, they had to be very upset about it.
Sure. Fortunately, they didn't tap into void years, 3 years ago when other people were doing it. They were more targeted, so they should be able to dig out from that $25 million or so, what it is, relatively quickly. But do you want to take it all in 1 year, or do you want to spread it out over 4? And I think they're probably somewhere in the middle. Really might be the best.
So the one other thing that I would point to is the Ravens on offense have the one player who lifts all boats. Okay. Given that they have that one player, and given that on defense they have 2 guys, and Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton, who I think are very similar. They don't have quite the impact on the game because they don't touch the ball every play, but they do have the impact in terms of making the structure really hold together and doing a lot of playmaking themselves. Should we look at this team differently? Ray Lewis and Ed Reed could do that for a defense together. And the Ravens, they didn't really have a single offensive player. They had a good offensive line, but they had a really, a pretty average quarterback at that time who was a game manager. Aren't the Ravens in a better position to replicate a 2012 now with this set of personnel?
I agree. I was going to make that same point. They have arguably the biggest force multiplier on both sides of the ball. We can't really say that until, if God forbid, Roquan missed a couple games to evaluate the defense. But hypothetically or theoretically, that's what they were sold as when they signed him. The force multiplier on the defense, the force multiplier on Lamar on the offense. They insulate you from I think, a really low ceiling. They raise their ceiling on their own, so maybe that gives you a little more opportunity. I'm sorry, they raise their floor on their own, so that maybe gives you more impetus to chase a little bit of ceiling.
Okay. All right. Any other topics we need to discuss today?
I think we wanted to talk on the mailbag question.
Oh, yeah, of course. No, I knew there was something. Okay, so let's bring that up for a second. And John Big Booty, which is one of the all-time great handles, by the way, says, is Madubuike worth the dollars? He's going to want a lot, but correct me if I'm wrong. Is it tough to find DTs that make as much of an impact as he does? On a related note, do you think his success this year has more to do with his own play, or is it more a function of the rest of the defensive scheme or the defensive around him he refers to? It's a great question, by the way. And I know one of the points that you'd made, and I should let you make it, but I'm going to make it for you because I think it's that good, is that his relationship between pressures and finishes is way out of whack for a defensive lineman.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I was just looking at this before the question even came across. There's a chart put out today that juxtaposed pass rush win rate against double team rate. And Madubuike is in the bottom left quadrant, which is not where you want to be. That's the worst spot as far as lowest amount of pass rush wins. The thing about him is, and I think this might be maybe the trade-off, is he's not as dominant of a run defender as some of the really elite D tackles, but he has the closing burst to get the quarterback on the ground when he does hit him. As we said, he's converting a high percentage of his pressures into sacks, which most defensive tackles don't do. They're flailing around and the quarterback kind of gives them a little shimmy and they go flying by or whatever. All that being said, I do think Madubuike's production is in large part due to scheme and surrounding talent. Brad Spielberger put out his projections this week. He pegged Madubuike at $92 million over 4 years, $23 million per. I'm not there. I'm mid-teens. I'm mid-teens. As good as he is, and he's number one player I'd like to resign, is likely to be my number two, but I think $23 million it would be an overpay, and I think you have to draw the line somewhere.
It'd be interesting. They don't have anybody obvious to replace him, so it'd make it a draft priority right away. They'd probably reach down into a similar round as they did to get him, which was a third-round player, which means it might be a multi-year build to Travis Jones is a guy you really, really have to come through if you're doing that. And I think if you don't get Madubuike, the one thing I'll say is you have to get Michael Pierce back. I don't think I want him anyway. Even if they get Madubuike, I want Michael Pierce back. All right, but I think I'd be with you. The $23 million a year is an awful lot, and you're really going to have to sacrifice just about everywhere else if you decide you want to make that move. If that may be too high a number. I don't know to what degree he's figured it for a $240 versus $255 million total salary cap, but that would potentially make a lot of difference on the margin and more than just a pro rata amount. So I'm saying it's not 255ths of 23 million is what he would expect to be. It's because there's less total money in the system. You've already spent 80% of it on most rosters. It's a bigger cut than that you'll take out of top salaries like this. But there will be demand. There will be demand definitely for him. And I agree with you. I think it's more been a scheme issue where he's one of the greatest cleanup men that we've seen in the NFL in a long time in terms of taking the ball, taking the quarterback down after first pressure.
Yeah, just very twitchy. So that works for him. But to me, if you're going to have a cornerstone contract, the $23 million, that's essentially 10% of the cap, defensive lineman, I want Haloti Ngata, who can do everything at an elite level. Just not, even though he has those gaudy sack numbers, a lot of that is not, sticky year to year. And next year, the cleanup opportunities, and the second chance opportunities don't come, and he only has 4 sacks, and you overpaid by a lot.
Yeah. I was thinking the exact same number when you're trying to project like what he might do next year if it's a little bit of a down year. But 4 sacks is probably a pretty reasonable number in there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Mm-hmm. Well, John, really appreciate your question. Thanks for jumping in. Everybody out there, make sure if you have questions for Friday Morning GM or any of the other Film Study programs, use hashtag Film Study Mailbag to submit those. Comments are fine too. By the way, we'll air those and probably have some own comments on them ourselves. But this is an exceptional question, and thanks, John. Vas, always a pleasure doing this show with you. You want to tell folks whether you can talk football with you online?
Sure. I am at Vasilis Beatdown on Twitter X, Vasilis Beatdown, co-managing editor and writer, author for Baltimore Beatdown blog. And I have another podcast that live streams Thursday night, 7:00, called The Ravens Way at Ravens Way Pod.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there, if you're interested in being on a Film Study short, hit me up. Getting some great ideas this last month, just fantastic ideas. And I want you to keep them coming. Some of them we won't be able to get to until the off season. Others we might record now and put out in the off season. But get those ideas in, please. I'll promise you I'll get back to you very quickly and we'll discuss them. If you have if you've been enjoying Friday Morning GM, if you could write a review for the show, that'd be terrific. We don't have any that are like specific to Friday Morning GM, which would be kind of nice to have out there. Have the various podcast apps picking those up and showing to people as a review. So if you like the show, write us 50 words of love and give us a 5-star rating, please. But we do appreciate the loyal listeners we have here.
Absolutely.
For Vas Laricos, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye, and we'll talk to you next time on Friday Morning GM.